Hi, everybody. Oh, I just want to say a brief thing about the phenomenon of fan mail. I worked for many, many years at ABC News, and I actually worked during a period when we got fan mail. When I worked at Nightline, and when I say mail, I mean an envelope came with a stamp on it from a person somewhere out in the country who would take the time to write something nice. And as a rule, the nice stuff outweighed the other kind of mail, which was hate mail. And we also got hate mail, and there was a big difference between the hate mail and the fan mail. And the difference was that the fan mail it was usually a short note, but the hate mail would be these very, very long, intense, type single space on one side of a piece of paper, and then on the other side of the piece of paper, and then pages and pages of that, which meant that somebody had to really put a huge amount of effort into telling us why we were the scum of the earth, and there was like a dedication there. And now we fast forward to the present day, where if you want to say something nasty online to somebody, it doesn't take any dedication at all. It takes a tweet and pushing send, and we're in a world where it may not be statistically correct. I don't know one way or the other, but it just feels like there's so much more of this kind of hate stuff going on. And by hate, I don't mean disagreement. I mean the decision to say that the person you disagree with is an awful person, is a bad person, has bad motives, deserves something horrible to happen to them. And there's a lot of this going on, and we want to have a conversation for the next few minutes to talk about the experience of this, a little bit about why it's happening, what the responses are of the social media companies, and what the response is doing to the people who are actually working in the social media companies. So I want to start with Monique. Monique, you are a physician of pediatrics, and you got hated upon.
Yeah,
tell the story.
I trained in both pediatrics and internal medicine. I practice internal medicine at Mass General. I have friends who are pediatricians.
Okay.
And one of those friends, Jen Trachtenberg, she's a pediatrician in New York City, had posted a very short video, professional video, in honor of National Immunization Month. And it was just sort of to the effect of, hey, immunizations are a good thing. You guys should go get your flu vaccine. Look, I got mine. And she got slammed online. I belong also to a Facebook
When you say slammed,
group.
meaning what?
Oh, so the post was on Instagram, and she immediately had about 1,000 negative comments, some of them very insulting, some of them threatening, and she was very alarmed. It was scary. It was scary for her to be inundated with all of this negativity and even threats when she was trying to post something sort of educational and medical and very relevant to her practice. So I belong to a Facebook group called Doctors in Social Media, and she posted in that group, hey, guys, help, to all her doctor colleagues. Please, somebody back me up here. You're doctors. You know what I'm talking about. And
So what was she looking for you to do? To raise your voice online?
Exactly. And so I did that in a couple of ways. And most people got on to the Instagram thread where she was being attacked and, posted things to the effect of, hey, guys, let's look at the facts about immunizations. Here's a link to the CDC. Here's a link to the AAP website. And I said something to the effect of, hey, my family's from Guatemala. I have done medical work in Guatemala and in Central America and South America, and I have seen a lot of these diseases that vaccines can prevent, including things like neonatal tetanus and things that we would never even hear of in this country. And they're real. These diseases are real, and vaccines are doing a really wonderful thing. If people could spend some time in the developing world, they might feel differently about vaccines. And then the negativity rolled to me, and I started getting slammed online, including online physician reviews on Yelp and Google, vitals.com, health grades. Within a number of weeks, I had over 100 one-star reviews with awful, horrible things being said about me from people who...
Can you give some examples? What were the horrible things being said?
Yeah, things like doesn't know what she's talking about, the pharmaceutical horror line that a lot of doctors get, ignorant, pushes her own agenda, these types of things from people who weren't my patients, who I've never seen as a
They were
doctor.
not your patients?
No, not even from the state of Massachusetts where I practice.
So what they knew about you was basically nothing except that you had taken this position?
Exactly. Yeah.
Did it get to you? Did you And the reason I say that again, again, being somebody who's somewhat in the public eye or who has been, you end up deciding that stuff is like you're walking through a rainstorm. Just carry an umbrella, and you're going to dry off eventually, and don't let it get to you. But I'm wondering, did it get to your core?
Yeah, so until it happens to you, you don't really know how it's going to feel. So up until that point, I'd been in practice at Mass General for 10 years, and I had a total of about 10 reviews online from all sites. And they were mostly positive, because who leaves a review? People who feel strongly. And people apparently felt strongly that they liked me, because I had, maybe 4.5 stars average. And I was secure in that, and it felt nice. And then to all of a sudden see that plummet, and you see like less than 1 star basically coming up when you pull your name up on Google.
Literally less than 1 star.
Oh yeah, it was alarming. It was very alarming. And the things that people were saying, you've gone through a great deal of effort and spent a great deal of money. Of your own money, and you've invested in education and career, and chosen primary care, which primary care medicine is not the most lucrative of all of the different medical areas. It's actually the least. And then there's people saying that you're doing it for the money. What? If I was in medicine for the money, I'd be in ophthalmology or something, or dermatology. I wouldn't be in primary care. And you want to argue with people, but you can't. It's sad. It's scary. It's disheartening.
So, did you have any recourse of any kind?
I thought I did. So when I saw all these reviews and finally realized what was happening, I reached out to all of these places, and Yelp and Google and Vitals. It took a really long time to figure out how to contact anybody, and I promptly never heard back from any of them. It wasn't until my hospital, thank goodness, assigned me a lawyer who got involved. And we didn't even need to do anything legal. He just started making the same phone calls and sending the same emails, but saying, I'm a lawyer. And somehow action happened. And a lot of the review websites started removing some of those negative reviews. It was easy to prove that they weren't real because they were coming from Oregon and California and Oklahoma. And I don't practice there. These aren't my patients. Plus there were clusters, and they were all sort of focused on the same topic. So it was easy once somebody looked at them. It was very easy for them to be identified as false and removed, which was frustrating because it took so long for somebody to look at them. Yeah.
Sarah, I want to bring you into the conversation. Thank you for your patience. You are. I want, for people who don't know, you are a global leader in the thing that you do. You're off to conferences around the world all the time because you are kind of ahead of everybody else and have been for a long time in the thing that you study. Tell us what it is.
So I study a phenomenon that I call commercial content moderation, and it used to be that when I brought that up, first of all, people would snooze, or they would say, I don't know what that is, and I'd pick up a phone and I'd say, when you take a picture and you upload it to Facebook or Twitter, there are actually legions of people who work for those platforms who have the ability to screen that material. How many of you have heard of content moderation before? Right. So I don't have to do that as much anymore, right? Because we now have somewhat more of a consciousness that these major platforms, some of the ones that you're talking about right now, in fact, have employees that are dedicated to reviewing people's complaints about content that has been flagged as problematic. And so I study that group of workers who review the material that we have deemed unacceptable for whatever reason. You can imagine that that's nothing short of a flood.
So I want to get deeper into what you've learned about the people who are actually doing this work. But before we do that, just talk a little bit about where are the social media platforms in taking on any sort of responsibility for the sort of nasty thing that Monique went through? Are they resisting getting involved? Are they facing up to it?
Well, I think that my sort of involvement in this sub-industry has been almost a decade now, and I have seen really a sea change around the ways in which the firms themselves are being called to account. In 2019, first of all, we had many people raise their hands understanding that this practice exists. I'm sure we've had just as many people flag some of this content, and I bet everyone here is a user of social media. So we collectively have sort of put the firms on notice that we expect a greater responsibility from them for our own well-being when we use the platforms. That having been said, these major platforms that we're talking about, or at least my area of expertise, is around American platforms that come from Silicon Valley. There are particular historical and ideological contexts that have made them what they are. And there are legal mechanisms within the United States that kind of give them free rein to not take responsibility per se all the time.
What is that ideological context?
It tends to be one that that leans towards a notion that information should circulate freely at all times, no matter what the information is, and there will be sort of a battle to be played out, right? Of a battle of maybe in some cases veracity, but in a lot of cases the loudest voice.
So the argument would be in a case like Monique's that, you know, people have the right to say what they want to say, right or wrong. That's kind of the spirit that Silicon Valley comes to this with initially?
It does, but the evidence on the other hand is that these firms are advertising firms, and they engage with advertisers to make money in that way, generating revenue off of our participation and our content that we upload. And given that fact, for a decade plus, they have had these arbiters, these commercial content moderators, making decisions about what content can be up and down. So that's at odds with that ideology that's espoused, except that the content moderation decisions were in the favor of the platforms, not necessarily in the favor of the users.
I want to go a little bit to one more step in that, but before we do, I just want to check in with Monique. The argument that even if those people were nasty and didn't know you, they have the right to raise their voice however they want and should be allowed to do that. How does that strike you as a person who feels like a victim of this?
No, you know what? It's not about being the nastiness. It's not about that. So just this year, the WHO, the World Health Organization, has identified vaccine hesitancy as one of the top 10 threats to global health.
Does everybody get what vaccine hesitancy means? Everybody's nodding, okay.
And that's a big deal. So, I mean, that's at the top 10. That's up there with like climate change, Ebola virus, there's not many things that are going to be that dangerous for people. Where is it coming from? And that's where the content moderation and the responsibility of these companies comes in. Places like Yelp and Google and Health Grades and Vitals, these websites are being co-opted to push an agenda. So that people vaccine skeptics and pseudoscience believers are getting onto these sites and using them to silence the truth, to silence the science, to silence physicians from spreading real information, from getting online and saying, hey, vaccines can protect you against things like neonatal tetanus, against things like the flu, the measles. So the fact that these websites are being co-opted and used for nefarious purposes that is leading to this threat to global health, that concerns me.
You say their purposes are nefarious? You think their motives are anything but believing that they're right and trying to make the world better as they understand it?
They may be motivated by different things, but the end result is we've now got measles.
Yeah. Sarah, Facebook again has made it clear that, the classic example that they've been upfront about, Holocaust denial. They will not ban somebody or shut somebody down for Holocaust denial because their point of view is that that's somebody's right of speech. Where do they draw the line? Where is content moderation actually happening?
Well, I think we can take those kinds of policy decisions at face value on the one hand and align them with this ideology that I referenced earlier, but I think we have to look at them with a little bit more of a critical eye. In the case of issues like Holocaust denial, vaccine skeptics, flat Earth, and a host of other kinds of evidently controversial topics.
Wait, flat Earth is a problem?
Anyone seen that documentary on Netflix? Have a cocktail before you watch it. Yes, evidently so. So any of these kinds of topics that apparently are up for debate, there's a pragmatic element here about what it takes to so-called moderate that material. Anybody here can go to your platform of choice and access the community guidelines and see what is disallowed on the platform. And typically those are things like violence and gore, harm to children, excessive sexual material, hate speech. That's where it starts to get dicey, right? Mm-hmm. So some of these things, when they're human beings making decisions about volumes of content, it happens this quickly, in a matter of seconds. When you can visually see, here's an image of harm to a person, blood everywhere, whatever, okay, we delete that. Mm-hmm. It becomes much more difficult to have to immerse oneself into a thread, figure out the nuances of what's being argued and debated, and decide what to do about it. It's costly, it takes time, it takes labor, and guess what? It's going to turn off some users. That's why platforms are so often reluctant to engage.
But they do have standards. There are things that they will take down, and there are people who are doing that. And you were surprised to learn that such people existed. Talk about your discovery of this whole field.
Sure. So back in the summer of 2010, I read a small piece in the New York Times about a group of workers. I was actually in grad school in central Illinois, in the cornfields of Illinois at the time, reading the paper on a break when I was teaching. And there was a story about some workers who were in nearby rural Iowa who were working in what, for all intents and purposes, seemed to me to be a call center. But they weren't taking phone calls like Sears service calls or something like that. What they were doing was actually screening flagged social media content against the parameters and rules of the platform. And they were doing this for about $9 an hour, and they were doing this as contract workers, no benefits. Many of the workers said things like, I used to be a boxer at Walmart, so this beats that. I had been on the internet at that point for about 20 years. I considered myself a late adopter in 1993, but anyway. And at that point, I had never thought that this legion of workers might exist. But as soon as I read about it, it became clear to me that just as, you know, a television broadcast channel doesn't open up its doors, turn on a camera and say, get in front of it without any recourse, neither would the social media platforms. And here was the evidence for that.
So what did you, and I want to let you know, you can start sending some questions in via Slido if we have time. I'd love to get to them. What was your discovery about the dilemma of these particular workers?
You know, the thing that I found across the board as I've kind of traced this practice around the world is that there are some shared characteristics, and this work tends to be very emotionally taxing, psychologically taxing, takes a lot of concentration in many cases. It's something that's difficult to turn off at the end of a shift. So how do you just get images out of your head?
Is it like first responders who go to a train accident and see awful things, and then they have to go home and deal with it, right?
Yeah. I think there are some real analogous kinds of professions. I mean, I think of war zone journalists, for example, in this case, or police officers. But the difference is that the folks who do commercial content moderation are typically low wage and low status. They're not understood as a class or a profession. And they're actually under non-disclosure agreements where they don't even get to talk about the work that they do, much less be heralded for it or lauded. And as you can imagine, there are a host of people who would be very angry to know that these people existed and that they were intervening on their content.
But could their jobs be done automatically, or does it take a human?
You know, the arc of Silicon Valley leans aspirationally towards computation. Mm-hmm. So the answer, if you ask folks out there, is that yes, soon we're going to have all of this automated. But when you talk to people who are in operations at the firms, the truth is that humans are never going to be out of this cycle. And in fact, I would say we don't want them out.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like an impossible task to make the choices of some. There were classic examples of Facebook censoring images or language where the context was misunderstood. So there was an author in Norway who put together a series of posts about war photographs that changed history. And he included the photograph of the young girl in Vietnam who had been napalmed. All of her clothes had been burned off and she was running down the street. I don't know if you're familiar with that photograph, but it was totally iconic. Facebook took it down because she was naked, violated nudity, and then they banned the guy from Facebook for posting this photo. And another example, there was a Black Lives Matter activist who received a racist post, and he reproduced that post saying, "Look at what I'm getting," and he was banned for putting racist language up on Facebook. Again, totally missing the context. And if the humans are missing the context, how can an algorithm ever get it right?
Right. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's why the humans remain. And, you know, in the case of the image of the terror of war, we have to understand that much of this work is being outsourced around the world to places that might be wholly unfamiliar with that image, although I would challenge the audience to ask a teenager to identify that photo. I mean, are we even teaching it in school? And here's sort of like where the illogic of these platforms comes into play at scale. Of course that image is obscene, but it's not because the young woman is naked, right? It's because her flesh was burned off by napalm in Vietnam.
Right. Oh, we have a question from Jennifer asking Monique, what advice do you have for people looking for medical information online? How can we avoid fake medical news, like from the people who targeted you? Such an easy question.
Yeah.
But what are your suggestions about that?
So my first inclination is to say, you know, maybe don't look online first thing. Maybe have a conversation with your doctor. I mean, that's what we're there for. We're taught through many years of schooling and training how to read research papers and how to translate them from science speaking to English and how to know what's good research. I mean, I'm also a medical researcher and have an MPH, and so go a little bit further into that, can talk about that endlessly. But the other places are to look for trusted medical information sites. For example, the American Academy of Pediatrics for people who are looking for information, the American College of Physicians, ACP. There's big organizations, very trusted, vetted. They know research. They know how to translate it for the public. They're able to create guidelines to help physicians to treat a wide variety of diseases and illnesses. So talk to your doctor about where to look too, because they can give you more resources.
Another question from Nick. How can the social media companies or new companies better service the emotional toll that these content moderators are experiencing, and can they do it at scale?
So I think that we need longitudinal studies to understand what the implications are for workers who are not only still on the job, but because this is so high turnover, where they are 2, 5, 10 years after leaving these jobs. Certainly, I think a recommendation is to have psychological counseling on site and to make that mandatory, because workers have told me that, you know, just having it kind of voluntary when you're supposed to be able to take this content and then you get up and walk past your manager to go to meet with the psychologist, puts them at a deficit in their workplace. So make it mandatory. Of course, raise their pay, raise their status, recognize the value that they bring, and bring back expertise, whether it's doctors, whether it's our moderators, whether it's librarians. I'd always throw that in there too. I think that's a big part of it as well.
I'm a big fan of librarians also. They're underappreciated.
Amen.
Sarah, Monique, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Good.